Are we back?
I think we're back.
All right. So we're back. Hi, my name is Philip Ha. I'm here with Apartment 613, and we are today at the Defining Ottawa Together consultation, which will then be integrated into the official plan. So we're here at City Hall, and we're sitting with a few folks to discuss as a group online culture. So from left to right, we have Sharon Goldhawk, who is the co-founder of the One World Arts Film Festival. And then we have Eleonora Rerelli from the University of Oregon. And we have Kwende Kafense with the City of Ottawa. So I'll get us started because the theme that our group has been assigned is online culture, and today's consultation has had a lot to do with physical spaces. So Kwende, maybe if you can tell us or inspire our online audiences about what online culture has to do with physical spaces.
For sure. Thanks, Phil. I mean, just the fact that there are potentially people actually watching this right now online from where they're at is an indication that the way that the online world has changed the way we conceive of space and the way that we can participate in different spaces has been quite a radical shift. Like, we're talking about a 25-year strategy. 25 years ago, could we have imagined that there would be people virtually sitting here with us right now, right? Or even the fact that we could take a discussion about culture and broadcast it around the world. So these are some basic fundamental changes. But then beyond that, when we think about particularly the world of work and the world of employment, this is a very interesting area where the online world will change a lot over the next 25 years. For example, like even 5 years ago, I wasn't working remotely as much as I am now. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I was not working online as much as I am now. I worked quite a bit remotely.
What do you do remotely?
Well, I mean, for example, we're able to, just for example, our team at the City of Ottawa, we now use an application to do our meetings remotely. So some of us are in 4 or 5 different locations. We all meet online and do our work meetings. Beyond that, the City of Ottawa is now encouraging people to use their own devices and to work remotely because they're understanding that, I'm sure for them, they're saving money on all kinds of stuff when people aren't actually coming into a space. And so you have, for example, corporations who might be interested in smaller footprints as far as their offices because they have so many people working remotely. And so this changes the way that we plan things like the way that we sort of zone and plan for workspaces. And then there are consequences of that. If people are working at home more and they're not traveling back and forth between a workplace and a home space, then they have different kinds of opportunities to learn about what's going on in their communities. And the proliferation of online life and sort of being able to operate online might change the way that we think about communities in terms of how do we plan for communities where people are actually going to be at home more than they will be going back and forth across the city. And so these are just some like basic ideas. A lot of them are sort of focused around the idea of sort of the work-home relationship. But at the same time, that's just some place where we can open it up. I don't know, Eleanor, do you have any other sort of thoughts about how the online world is sort of changing the way we think about physical space?
Well, the aspect that I really enjoy the most of the online space is how it can connect people that otherwise could have not been connected. So somewhat is a way to inhabit a physical space in a way that was not possible before, and bring to your own space people that otherwise would never have the opportunity. And at the same time, though, I'm always very cautious on the idea that this can be then viewed as substituting the physical space. So for me, it's more like enhancing the physical space and making it more available to others, and then creating this local global connection. But at the same time, how then also it's still important to have personal relationship as people in the room sitting together.
No, I agree with that, and I think that there's also one thing I also didn't mention is the notion that, you know, and you mentioned it in your comment there about the connection to the world, and particularly for people who are immigrating and people who are new Canadians coming here, their ability to connect with the places where they came from and to actually bring components of their culture with them, despite the fact, you know, not being able to do that physically. Like, for example, I mean, when my parents immigrated to Canada, you know, one thing that they brought with them was a record collection from Barbados. And the one thing that they brought with them was a record collection, because that was a way, that was a way to preserve that culture and to actually have this connection to back home. And now, you know, someone might not have to do that. They can actually connect to home all the time, or wherever that other home is, that place of origin. You know, the online world is actually facilitating that kind of transspatial relationship, and then also allowing, you know, people from here who are located in Ottawa to experience these cultures from around the world as well, in different kinds of spaces than they ever would be able to before. You gotta hit that button.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, well, obviously the living and working overseas opportunities, I just come from 20 years overseas, so I've left Ottawa, it's like a time machine. It's sort of not so much, obviously come back to visit, but the whole idea that, you know, you put your feet on the ground in a place that the last time you lived here was 20 years ago. And a lot of the things they referred to today, there's issues about what happened in '89 and what happened in 2000 and that sort of thing. I was here at that point, in that point of time, and I immigrated from the US, so I'm myself an immigrant, and so about 88, 89 I came up from Philadelphia area, but I have to say that Ottawa is really a unique place, and it sort of has a mix. I'm an immigrant, and I tell people that as a way of saying, prefacing, yes, I made this choice, but I still try to build the bridges between all the places that I live and work, and I've come from South Africa, Mongolia, Bangkok, Thailand, Sydney, Australia, Athens, Greece, and most foreign place of all, Atlanta, Georgia. Because the politics does hit you sideways, and you have to know how to bridge these worlds and kind of open up the channel of communication, because I feel like we deal with people, the last couple decades, people are not talking to each other. The idea of how to get people to communicate, because face-to-face is more confronting now, but the openness that people might have online to be able to, one of the things with the One World Film Festival is discussion of issue, so that you open up that discussion with discourse. You allow people to ask the uncomfortable questions, to deal with an issue.
Do you ever try and bring that into a physical space in terms of those discussions? Like, do you take them from online into the physical space?
I said I've just been back since 2018, so I'm sort of trying to change things up. So the idea that obviously you can beam in, obviously the Skype calls and that sort of, but we've just done it with some directors, two-way conversations. And overseas, I've been part of a South Africa conference at Carleton University where there were some difficult things being discussed, but I was streaming for everybody from South Africa to Canada, across Canada, to give people a chance to kind of interact and ask the questions that otherwise they wouldn't have a chance to ask. So it's a really great opportunity, but I like to think in little chunks, like 5, 10, 15 years, because, you know, you're a futurist, but I feel like I like to deal with the reality of how I'm a social worker in a way, because I try to make people comfortable. And in diplomacy or cultural diplomacy, you need to build the bridges. You need to take the first steps. And it doesn't always have to be an extreme step. It's something that people need to feel comfortable with on the first level, and that's what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Just on that note, please go ahead.
I mean, no, you go ahead. You know, it could be your stand.
I was actually just going to say, you know, working with Apartment 613 as its community manager, what that means is you're often trying to engage people on the internet towards some kind of action in a physical space. And the difficulty that we sometimes have is making that link between the two. What I've noticed is that we often use the online sphere to either enhance or complement a physical space. But it's rarely done the other way around, in that we take something online and we want it to manifest in person. So I'm wondering if you have, I was saying, I'm just to repeat myself, we often use the online space and online sort of orchestration to complement or enhance physical spaces. But I've noticed that it doesn't necessarily work the other way around as effectively, in that if I have something that's happening online and I want to take it into a physical space, it's harder to engage online folks to do something in person. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas as to, how can you make that link from online and bring them into a physical place?
Would you give an example, just one, what you're talking about?
Sure. So let's say, so Apartment 613, what it will do is it'll go ahead and promote many events that are taking place in different spaces across the city. It's, this is a pretty simple form of either advertising or even just article writing or just kind of community news. But it doesn't necessarily mean that those people who are engaged online, who are busy reading these articles, who are even writing those articles, are necessarily actively participating in that community. They are not necessarily going to the places that they are reading about. So what are some ways that we could actually bridge those essentially two communities together?
And that's really interesting, because I wonder, I think about the fact that, to do anything to make any kind of move, you are either taking advantage of a spatial scenario, or you're overcoming a spatial scenario in order to get to what it is you're trying to do, whether it's going to a grocery store, going to a party, whatever it is. Either you're leveraging your proximity in a way, or you're overcoming the distance between yourself and the thing that you're trying to get at. And I just wonder if there isn't some sort of spatial proximity thing. Like, again, when we think about how we build communities, and are there enough spaces in communities for people to actually gather where they live? Because that might be an issue. It might, as was stated, Ottawa's 80% rural. It's quite a big territory, and so I just wonder if people might just have geographical challenges where it's like, okay, that's interesting, but I live in Canada and this thing is happening downtown. And
but so then how do we translate geography into a solvable issue? So if they cannot go from Canada to downtown Ottawa, what's the issue? Is transportation? Is because transportation is not available, because they don't have a car, there's no public transportation. So I think that maybe the way to think about how do we move the online community to be in one place together is, for sure, first of all, a transportation issue. And then how do we make transportation happen? Then it becomes an economic issue, right? So then making that actionable and solving that issue. And I don't know if something else can come.
But it's interesting that you should say that, because right now, I mean, we're in an interesting stage in the city's development in terms of development of these new deepened variables, this transportation system, which is now about to be implemented and become a part of the city's fabric. And I think that thinking about the cultural implications and ramifications of that are relevant, because, I mean, I know that when I was growing up, I grew up in the Greater Toronto area, and I grew up starting in Toronto, but then eventually moved to Mississauga. And there were, when I was growing up, that area was in development, and there was a lot of cultural stuff going on in Mississauga, but people in Toronto wouldn't hear about it because we were, 20 minutes away, however close or far that seems. And as transportation networks developed, GO Transit, as there became greater access to Mississauga Transit connecting with TTC and all of these different sort of public modes of being able to connect, and this is all pre-online. You know, not to date myself, but this is all like before the online world was a thing, and so it was very difficult for there to be a strong connection culturally between the activities that were happening in just like a suburb of Toronto and Toronto. Now, I'm so shocked at what's happening. Like I'm seeing music shows presented in Mississauga that used to never be presented there. And people coming from Toronto to Mississauga because they're actually hearing about things that are going on now. They have that connection, not only in terms of digitally, because they can actually get a sense of what's going on around them, but also physically, they have the capacity to get there easily.
Okay. They've actually talked about this with the 25-year plan. I just was part of something last week where the idea of the 15, 20-minute community, and that's the way it's referred to as a 15-minute community. So, yeah, the idea is that every place should have, like, it's a neighborhood. And even, I hate to say, but the way people viewed Mississauga and these places were always like, that's the suburb. There is no there. There's no downtown. But now that rethinking of how to make each opportunity to make a community within the community, to give town centers and to give the crossroads, to give that an opportunity. And it's easier to happen in a place like Ottawa. Toronto is, vast, and I used to live down on around Spadina and Bloor or whatever down there in the annex when you could live there. Okay, won't go there. But the idea is that Toronto is, so many amazing neighborhoods, and so does Ottawa. So this is to give credit to people that live and build their own communities, and there is now funding and there is a support system to support. Like, there are so many places that people would never go, but once you go there, you find that there is something there, that the community, and I'm about community development because I worked with the homeless in Philadelphia when I was in university. I always am about how to cross into different communities and build the bridges, the gang issues, the gang attitudes, the way that people end up alienating each other, even if it's just in their mind. Like, people just don't cross those bridges. So making, I hate to say it, but it's sort of like crash landing into these different communities and showing that there is something there, like you're saying, that disproving them.
And I think that some of the online, some of what's on the online world is what, I mean, at least these days, that's how people are sort of gathering and in some ways sort of crystallizing what it is they want to get together about in the real world. Or in the physical world. And so it's interesting to see that the way that some of these, well, Phil, like you were saying, the way that some of these things can translate and how difficult it is to translate others. And I think, just one other thing is, what I find interesting, particularly about what you guys do, in Ottawa, there used to be, an Arts and Culture Weekly, the Ottawa Express, and it was easy to go and find sort of what was going on in the city because you could just go to a corner where there would be a box where these papers would be distributed. And now, what we have, thankfully, is Apartment 613 because that whole physical component of how to get information has really just evaporated. And, thinking about that and in terms of, there used to be this, there used to be a different kind of relationship to the physical city that you would, I guess, but there used to be a different relationship between information and the physical city. And now it's quite different. And, just thinking about that as well, I think is something to, to problematize a bit as we consider the official plan.
So another aspect, so then what I've heard is then communication, and it seems that the online aspect is taking care of communication, so then people know about what's going on. And then transportation can be an issue that comes into how do I get there. But then also I think that is also the purpose, that also what's really the purpose for me to be there, or is that enough for me to know about that online, or is that a concert, so then if I can hear about it and I can hear the music in my living room, so is that enough? So what will also make me to go through the hassle of finding the right transportation to get there? What's the value added? So information, I have it, transportation maybe, but then what's making me go through understanding how to get there? What's really the purpose? Is there an advantage, right? So An example that is very basic is online dating, right? People get access to people that otherwise how would they get to know them, right? But then what makes you to go and get coffee with that person?
Right.
I'm going to talk, we could go there. We could go there. Yeah, I can see that what motivates people to get up out of their nest and come out and connect and actually have interaction, and whether it's participation or just to watch something or listen to a concert. And this is something that really needs explored, because the live body experience is something that we have we've lost touch with. It's people they're so used to being the voyeur. They're so used to being watching whenever, whatever, however. They don't actually, nobody requires them to come out, but little things that you do with, whether it's 613, and I hate to say that Eventbrite does kind of take over people's worlds, because it kind of shows them the way, and then they say, I'm coming to that, or I'm going to try that, or I'm thinking about that, and then they see other people are doing it. So it's like, who's coming to the party concept? When they see other people signing up, that's what gets them to sign up. That's what gets them to show up.
The social aspect.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, this is a fascinating thing as well, because recently, that's another example, and this is an example of the way that the online world can help bring people together, and a good example in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of what's the value of it. Recently there was a concert that happened in Ottawa by an artist called Mdu Mokhtar, and right. And he's somebody from the Sahel region of North Africa. He's a real African rock star, and
I'm going to say that was part of the Sol video, the Knot space. That was really cool, because it evolved out of the Sol. That performance, the video co-op, and Nevin over at the Knot Space, it brought him because he'd seen him, out in the world, and then he decided, and then he got the video, and then they showed the video in the installation space, and then he got him to come in person, and we were there, and it was so great.
And so, but what I was going to say is that what was interesting about that show was that. Yeah, a whole range of, I guess, so the show was promoted and it sold out, but what we didn't recognize, firstly, that in itself is quite amazing, that a North African rock artist could be here and selling out a show. That couldn't happen without the internet. And then, or maybe it could. No, I shouldn't say that. Maybe it could, but it would be very challenging. And then the other thing, too, is that a whole group of community members from Niger. So there were all these people from Niger in traditional dress who showed up because they heard about the show somehow, and they said, oh my God, this is our culture. We have to come through. And then that was how, for me, I personally made connections with people from Niger and Ottawa, and that was how I knew where they were and sort of what was going on with that community, because they heard about something online, and they determined that it's like, I have to be there because this is my culture. And this is, another way that the online world can actually bring access by actually, putting the information out there. And if it's meaningful, as you said, if there's a real meaningful social component to it, people will actually get together, and then that will start developing those new connections.
I think that was an accessible crossroads space, because where they held it, it wasn't buried in some club downstairs somewhere. It was visible from outside. You could walk by it. You could be intrigued to walk into it. It was like it was the downtown space, really close to the Parliament stop. And everything.
Queen Street Fair.
Yeah, Queen Street Fair, and that is a new space to me. But I have to say, what a cool space, because it was sort of, different things at different time of day. It becomes different things, and it was such a cool club. Yeah.
And that's interesting, because so that shows also how a physical space can learn from online visibility. So visibility is something that you can portray online, so then a lot of people knew about that because of internet, but was not enough. So then she's really highlighting how also visibility should be also once you are there, right? That you can find the place, that you know where to go. And then another aspect that seems very important is that also local global connection. So you bring people that are from Niger, but that they're here, that otherwise maybe they don't have voice and don't have that visibility. Maybe that's also a way to bring them here and make them visible.
I really like where this is going about how we're talking about the accessibility that online culture provides, right? Right now, we're live streaming this so that folks who cannot be in the room or at City Hall can either participate or at least listen in to be informed over time. Do you have any notions as to how the city could improve this kind of sort of infrastructure that would allow folks online to bring these experiences in a more lively manner? So, you know, as an example, Apartment 613 started, 10 years ago as just a group of friends who were, writing about the content. Now, today, we have folks who are not writing at all. They're submitting photo essays, they're making videos, they're live streaming, they're doing this from a mobile device, but generally they do this with whatever means that they have. So I'm curious to know, can the city do any better?
If you don't mind me mentioning this, it's just a way of building another bridge. And as soon as you said that's it's all about accessibility and the opportunity that to test the waters in different ways. And as you're suggesting, we need to experiment more, try things, and actually fail sometimes because the willingness to try and fail. But I will just tell you as an example, for One World Arts and One World Film Festival, we've actually, just as a way of building a bridge here, is we have people who have actually stayed connected to our group and volunteering time that moved to Brazil, Lebanon, South Africa, and Asia that have been here. They were moving away for long periods of time or short periods of time, but they actually stayed connected to their contribution or their opportunity to contribute because of this online participation, the idea that they had been here and participated, and then they didn't want to leave it behind, but they can literally they can help us with social media, communications, grant writing, fundraising, advocacy, the idea that it's all out there, and even networking and making the connections about the musicians, and whether it's because we do short film or feature film, and I got some stuff from South Africa, and I brought the people here, and then you sort of try to develop something in the community which reflects housing. It was a big issue. So I did it's called Not My Neighborhood. We screened it last year during the tornado, mind you. We actually ran a film festival that was started on the Thursday, and Friday they were driving across town. They had never been here before. They were from South Africa, lost the GPS signal, and arrived in a tornado, lost the power. It was a very interesting example of what happens, that you have to be prepared for anything, because when they got to Arts Court, I sort of gave them some landmarks to sort of get here. They ended up, it was sort of like the thing that happens in South Africa. I was there. You lose your power. You get cut, but you still have to do your thing. And so they were like, this is like home. Just like home. So we actually ran on a generator, an hour late, but nobody knew that we ran the whole festival on a generator the whole week, the rest of the weekend. But it was sort of like, just go with the flow. But they came here, they had some really informal interaction, like you mentioned about the musicians. And once you do that, it really sort of sparked an interest in coming back and working in the community. And actually, we introduced them to IFCO, Patrice at IFCO and Independent Film Co-op, about doing workshops and about sharing work and let's just say for me the documentary about how things come to be behind the scenes, giving people a credit and appreciation for the development of the arts, whether it's theater, music, anything. It's just that's what I'm kind of intrigued by, and we're trying to keep that kind of open for people. But I feel that online, anything could happen because you can give people that opportunity to share. Mm-hmm. And then it doesn't happen right away, but it builds their confidence. And so you could give a workshop online, or somebody who can't make it to the workshop on documentary filmmaking, they could attend. As I was, part of my master's thesis was distance education, comparing the British, US, and Canadian models. But I have to say, but it's all about people feeling acknowledged. Mm-hmm.
And I think too, you know, in terms of what you're talking about there, what can the city do? I mean, you know, this session here is, you know, is a part of it in some ways in terms of trying to make an effort to leverage the online world in a way that actually prioritizes the process of bringing people together. Because really what we're talking about, you know, this stream is really about, this stream and this whole day is really about, you know, bringing together the people in this room with all the people who can't be in this room. And, you know, that's, you know, it's a small step. And I mean, I know that council certainly, like, they stream their council meetings, and that stuff is good as well. But I think, you know, looking for more opportunities to create that dialogue and use, like you said, that sense of acknowledgement and sort of reciprocal conversation online, and maybe moving away from sort of the more one-way communication style, where it's like, you know, we're just sending out info, tweets, and whatever else. Like, finding a real a way to, for when the city is operating online, to have a voice, like a more distinctive voice, and something that you know, maybe I don't know, more personal. Is something that, really finding ways to connect with organizations like yours who have developed that relationship online with a community, have a voice, and sort of work with organizations to communicate, you know, through those voices that people actually find personally appealing, and that they actually personally connect with. Because I think, Eleanor, like you were saying, you made a really good point. Like, what motivates somebody to actually want to go to something after they see it online? Why would they even go if they can just engage it online? I think part of it is because, you know, if they feel acknowledged, if they feel like, oh, okay, like, yeah, that's but that person was talking to me. Okay, well, I'll go to that. And so, you know.
Well, as they provided all very specific example, you know, from experimenting more and distance education, and then also having more reciprocal communication that is not just like sending out information in tweets, and then also involving organization like yours. And on a more like broader perspective, for me, is like any type of community engagement is to understand who is the community, right? And so how is that community working, and therefore being able to engage with that. And so understanding how an online community works is going to be important for the city. So always, you know, doing that research before then getting into action plan as well.
I agree with that. I mean, I think I think that there's a gap in knowledge, perhaps, about sort of like the structure and hierarchy of how information flows through the city, because it's very different than it was. Obviously, like there was a point in time where if you could get an article in the Ottawa Citizen, you've made it to the Bali Politic. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's it. Like everybody will get it. And now, because the information networks are so diffuse, the way to connect with people, or I guess I should say, I don't think you know, maybe the city has a fulsome understanding of, you know, the structure of its online community in the same way that it does the structure of the streets. You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously there are lots of maps and data about the physical you know, landscape in Ottawa, but you know, what do we have about the way that the online world works, and that the city actually leverages to do work?
I'm going to say something about the One World Film Festival, because it's, as we speak, we're spreading it out between, you know, it's not a weekend anymore, like during the tornado weekend last year, so we don't have to worry. So it's between late September throughout October. There's a 19th of October thing coming up, which is but the discussions about truth and in a post-truth world, that's the film we're showing, Bellingcat, which is from the Netherlands. So in the Canadian film, which is We Will Stand Up, and we'll have discussion after both of those things, which is really what the film festival is all about, is to be able to raise the issues, ask the questions, not just talk about how a film was made, but talk about the issue on the table, and actually have discourse and have people, it would be great to debate. And I think that's the idea, is to get people sort of show up in person and ask your question. Because I think the online thing, it's nice to be able to do the Skype thing, but then it's like if you're there in the room, and we had films about the Chinese issues last year, and they showed up on both sides with their armies, and they had the debate and the discourse that we miss because there's not enough time for it anymore. There's not enough room. It's sort of, people see things and they get uncomfortable, and then they sort of change the channel, and then so the idea of this, if you stick around, see what happens when people show up in person. And I thought maybe a salon, or we're starting to do cafe things. I use Haven Books and Cafe to show a short film and have a discussion with Carleton University students. So whether it's like 10 people or 50 people or 100 people, it's really great to be able to have small groups and kind of show, well, what do you guys want? And I really feel like this year it's about ask the community, what do you want? How do you want this to go? Instead of just saying this is the way it is. The model, it can be anything. We can break the model, and then just the point, the difference that we find is that when people are in the room and the issue comes up, then there's an opportunity to have action. So that means that people step up and they say, now what are you going to do about it? And they actually show up and they sign up. And they actually do something, and it makes them feel amazing. The fact that you actually give people that power of acknowledgement and participation beyond just watching something, okay? So that you have to break the model, experiment, try different things, be willing to fail, and just show up. It's like Woody Allen says, half of life is just showing up.
One other thought about how the city can improve the connection with the online community would be also to improve its presence online. Right, because
website.
Able to
Here, thank you.
the website of the city, because the city presentation online so far doesn't really open the door to engagement. And so then I think that in order to connect with the online community, having a clear online presence is going to be vital for the city.
Is there anything coming in from online? Any questions or ideas, Monsieur Phil? It's okay. If it's okay, I mean, we don't gotta, you know what I'm saying? We're not trying to press the online people, but if there's anything coming in that people want to.
I was going to ask you asked a question earlier, and I sort of danced around it a bit, but I have to say, you asked us the question. Did you get an answer to that question?
I did, yes.
You did?
The answers have been really, really fulfilling.
Could you reflect back on anything that sort of stuck with you there?
Well, something that has stuck with me is the online community is a really wide one, and so from what I'm hearing, it isn't necessarily about finding a singular method. It's really about understanding that there's a whole range of different types of people that you're trying to reach and activate. And so I think there's certainly a need to consider all these forms of communication with different types of people who learn different ways, who are engaged for different reasons. And so it isn't just, about a single way of doing it online. Yes, for sure, presence is an important one, but presence in different medium will be key. Whether that's people who want to engage visually, people who want to be able to read, people who want to be able to access something on the go, people who only want to find an answer through search. Things like this are really important to consider. The website is certainly something that people rely on heavily, and some other people get their news and updates through social media. So there's multiple avenues that we have to approach, for sure. That's what I'm learning here.
And one thing, I mean, I said it there, but now that I'm rethinking it, I'm just thinking, yeah, that's true. We do need to map out the online world in some kind of way. Just understand how Ottawa online looks, works. We don't quite know that right now. And as you said, there are so many different ways that people are connecting to information. If we can't sort of map that out or visualize that or understand that in a more tactile kind of way, you know, it'll be really challenging to actually for the city as an organization to communicate effectively in the future.
Completely changing the topic. I recently, you know, I was having this conversation with an artist who had said that, you know, she's from Ottawa originally and had moved away to Montreal, and because she had imagined that, you know, if you were going to pursue a career as an artist, you should move to a bigger city like Montreal or Toronto and so on. And she's realized that, you know, through things like, you know, Instagram, she's been able to sell her art internationally. So she's moved back to Ottawa because this is, you know, this is home, but it also is a sort of culture that she not only relates to, but feels that she can contribute to. So that's one thing that I just want to throw into the mix and see if you have any ideas or notions about that.
She's a visual artist?
She is, yes.
Okay, so graphic, painting, installation, what, all of it?
I'd say all of it. But yeah, painting is a good way to
And she's
put
in
it.
Montreal now, but she's come back.
She's in Ottawa now.
Okay. Yeah, because the idea is that I've always felt like artists, it's a sort of a private world of when they create, and obviously she's sharing this probably with blog and obviously any opportunity she has to share her experience of creating and developing her work. It gives insight. I feel like I've gone to some workshops or sessions here in Ottawa recently that give people an opportunity to get a peek into those worlds that are very private usually, and people write books, they don't come out of their room. Like I went to sort of a weekend on people writing books. It was great because it's sort of, those are the people that then I connected with, and then I tried to develop sort of a different kind of relationship with, because they were developing their own work in their own private space. But they needed to help with collaboration. They needed to connect with people. I feel like people should not be left, you know, all the time by themselves and feeling that there's nobody else there and nobody cares what I'm doing. And unless you connect directly with, I like her work, or if I don't like her work, then you never talk to them again. But I feel like it's nice to build the opportunities for people to work with each other in whatever way they might need that would help them with their work. So she may or may not need that kind of experience, but the salon or the cafe network, or the opportunity for a writer or an artist to be in sort of an electronic salon setting and actually, you know, show behind the scenes. What is she doing? Show how she creates her work. Give us some of that insight. It's sort of like a mini documentary clip, but that might actually, it helps build the bridge.
And I think it's interesting the way that the online world, or that access to the world can actually help root you in place. The idea that because, you know, you're able to access all these different places, it might mean that you're able to actually stay where you're at and contribute to the place where you're at in a different kind of way than before. You know, an artist like your friend, as you said before, might have felt like, you know, to be able to access industry, I have to go to like an industry city. And now, you know, you can build that relationship with industry and live wherever you're at. And that's a fascinating thing, because, I mean, it actually highlights the value of things like conferences, of all of these sort of like these physical real world meeting places where you actually build those connections and then you continue those connections from wherever you're at. And that's a different way of operating, again, that's totally contingent on being online and being able to make those kinds of connections.
And another aspect that somewhat is a segue of that, so then you can stay where you are. And what is important about that is that anyway you see all the aspects that are part of a place, just like when you look for a book online and then you order that book and you just get that. While then if you go to the library to search for that book, then you see all the similar books that are around that book, right, that have similar titles. And so then, yeah, you can be also very specific about, and online allows you for specificity, but then also there is a nice aspect of from there, right?
That the real world gives you, yeah.
It's like the browse. It's always like the accidental discovery is always the nicest one. It's like that's why you miss browsing, like libraries and used bookshops. It always offers these amazing connections and ways of building. Again, it's connections that we don't expect. And I believe in synchronicity, and especially for artists, things happen sometimes when you get off path. And that's why if people stay on their path so much and they have a planned and schedule in life, it's like deviate from your path, because that will give you these opportunities you just cannot imagine.
And this is the idea that I think makes artists vital for planners, because planners don't usually embrace this idea. Actually, they resist it. And so, yeah, everything should happen in a certain way, so they don't embrace serendipity. And so while then if they can work with artists, then can embrace different way to approach the world and also make the best of these new approaches.
And I think, you made a really good point just now about, particularly about...
You should say a person's name when you say that. You say, you made a good point.
Sharon, you made a good point there.
It does actually say, you are right. People don't hear that word very much. I always said, better than I love you. You are right.
Okay, excuse me, touche. But Sharon, you're right in terms of the idea about, the effect of browsing and being able to sort of look at things in a slightly more general way. And I think that one of the more, we've been talking in some ways about, I think we've been talking in very positive light about the online world, but I think that one of the more challenging things and potentially like insidious things about the online world is the way that it's ringy and recursive, because of the way that the personalization of the internet has made it such that you only see the stuff that you want to see now, or that artificial intelligence can, based on your past choices, there's a sort of path dependency about the way that people use the internet. And so, as you said, when you're looking at Amazon, you're not seeing all the books. You're seeing the books that the artificial intelligence has determined that you will most likely want to see. And this is a challenging component of the online world, because it's the component that actually creates separate worlds for people online. And this is something that, and I think that that's part of something that the physical space helps people overcome, but it can be challenging sometimes because, yeah, like I said, the internet, particularly at the internet that we're on, the version of the internet that we're on right now, is heavily inundated with algorithms that personalize everything such that you don't, it's all walled gardens in some ways. And
well, you're bringing in a different dimension that is also how the internet is not just a tool you're using, but is also the big brother that is kind of looking at you, monitoring you, in all very little step, and then studying what that means. And sometimes we forget that we are viewed when we are
viewing.
And the connect and the disconnect is a big thing, because I have an 18-year-old now that's just first semester university, and we lived overseas, her whole life. So the last year and a half, 2 years in Ottawa, she finally got to, live in Ottawa, and this is home per se. But she's, of course, had to go to the big city, Toronto, because I walked her around Toronto too many times, it's like, and but down at Ryerson, of course, in psychology. But I have to say that there is this worry about, they say, the negative side is feeling disconnected. Young people, old people, people, living in a disconnected world and feeling, and they sort of trying so much, like there's all this looking at your phone stuff, but the idea that how do you build a positive connection? Like that's what you're talking about. How do you help to sort of nurture that and guide that as much as possible without controlling it too much? Like, again, experimenting, letting things happen, letting things fail. Like, and I think the government, I hate to say it, but obviously things are about control, and it's always about control, and the website is one sort of
control mechanism.
It's a control mechanism that this is the way we want you to view things, but allowing, like an artist in residence at City of Ottawa, could be a social media artist in residence, just an experimental period where you don't, sign that person up for years. You sign them up for a few months. It's like an in-school artist in residence program where you just let an artist in residence be part of that online connection to develop different opportunities, different ways of seeing things, and not just handing it over to somebody for a long time, because they want it to change.
Phil, any thoughts on all that?
It's all very good, really.
Okay. Well, I think we're almost done because it's 5:30. I think we're going to close this off. So.
I think 5:15.
Oh, was it 5:15?
It's
Did
right
we go
now.
over? We're
All
over.
right. We're right on time.
We're right on time.
All right.
And
Well.
so, we want to thank you, Phil, for hosting. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You have to talk about One World and come out to One World, because this is about, it's obviously the whole idea that you'll hear about it, just look up One World Film Festival and see what's going on, because we decide not to hide in a space for a couple days and hope everybody shows up. We're like, it was taking it all over the city, different theaters, different spaces. Margaret Atwood, we have the film that nobody else knows about. It's Margaret Atwood, A Word After Word After Word is Power. That's on November the 13th. With Peter Raymond, the director, and I had known him from decades ago, but it's going to be like a premiere here, which is going to be at the Bytown. But I have to say that the one this Saturday I'm more concerned about is the Bellingcat Truth in a Post-Truth World, and the Aboriginal film We Will Stand Up. Is the two films together at the Ottawa Art Gallery. It just gives people a chance to come and see what it's about, and it's like $10 a film or whatever, it's not much. So or just come to one film, you don't have to come to two, but then there's discussion after. And we have some people from the session here today that will be on like a discussion after about the issues that we talked about even today, okay?
Great. Thank you very much, Erin. We'll certainly be proponing that on apartment 613.
Good.
But excellent way of sort of bridging viewers and people who definitely want to advocate as well. Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you, Kwende, for your time.
For having us.
For those who are watching this online, the live stream obviously will live on apartment 613. For those who are looking to share more ideas, we will also be posting a link on the website towards Engage Ottawa, which is the City of Ottawa's online platform for feedback and ideas. So we will be publishing that in the very short-term future. But until then, this live stream will live on YouTube for forever.
Whoa.
Merci.